In Ukraine, the capital Kyiv facing a massive wave of Russian missile and drone strikes. City officials say at least 13 locations around Kyiv have been hit, including residential areas, in what has been now an hours-long attack. Right now, people still sheltering below ground as sirens sound above. So far, at least 8 people have been reported injured. The timing of this attack is notable, given that President Trump spoke to Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier today.
We had a call. It was a pretty long call. We talked about a lot of things, including Iran. And we also talked about, as you know, the war with Ukraine. And I'm not happy about that.
Do you feel like you made any progress?
No, I didn't make any progress with him today at all.
Joining me now, my intelligence and military sources, Beth Sanner, former Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Cedric Slayton. So, Beth Sanner, U.S. President has a conversation with Vladimir Putin today, and hours later, Russia launches a quite sizable strike on Ukraine. Is that a message to the U.S. President, or at a minimum, is it at least defying U.S. pressure?
Yes, and it's a consistent pressure. I mean, if you look back, and I have, along with Cedric here, if you look back at every time that he said, stop Vladimir, or made a call, he strikes. Putin strikes again within the next day. I mean, the worst thing, I get why this administration wants to keep the dialogue open, but Putin responds every time with a finger.
Right.
And at some point, I mean, if I were in Ukraine, I'd be like, stop calling President Putin because it rains missiles down on us.
I mean, it's fair that you mentioned Ukraine because President Trump has been willing to apply pressure to Ukraine that he's not been willing to apply to Russia, who, by the way, is the aggressor, invaded Ukraine. And again, just in the last several days, we understand it that the U.S. is now pausing weapons shipments, specifically air defense missiles, which are quite necessary tonight over Kyiv. That imbalance, does that make sense strategically?
No, it does not, Jim. And, I think one of the key things here is that the only thing that Putin would understand is force in return for force. In other words, what really needs to happen is the exact opposite of what's doing. We need to speed up the shipment of weapons. We need to speed up the delivery of Patriot missile batteries to Ukraine and make it very clear to the Russians that they have no chance of beating Ukraine. That would have to be the way to do this.
But you have been saying that. U.S. Democratic and Republican lawmakers have been saying that. Leaders of our closest European allies have been saying that for months and years. And Trump, whether he's hearing the message or not, we don't know, but he's not acting on that message. Is it past time now for Ukraine and its European allies to say we cannot rely on the U.S. for this kind of support?
Well, look, Trump has been giving a 2-week deadline since April 24th.
Right.
And it's been a moving deadline. I think we've given enough time. The question is, what is he going to do? What the Europeans can do and Ukraine can do, they are. But there are limits.
Right.
Because they're not producing air defense missiles. They don't have Patriots that they can churn out. I think that the intelligence relationship is going to stay. It's cheap. DOD doesn't control it. But I think that in terms of air defenses and HIMARS and some things that are exquisitely and only the United States, this is a problem. They at least have to accept the idea at the White House that the Europeans can fund and buy this equipment for Ukraine. And that's kind of the only way that people are thinking there's a way out here.
And they seem to believe that's a way to appeal to the president, right? Because it would be business for U.S. defense contractors. What the president says, and he said it again today, and it seems to be the reason why the DOD is conducting a review of these weapon supplies, is that U.S. supplies are short. Is that true?
In part it is. And one of the problems that we have is the defense industrial base. Now, there has been a movement to ramp up the production of artillery shells, especially the 155 millimeter variety.
Yeah, but that's long past now. We're talking about defense, air defense systems.
Now, and what they really need to do is make sure that the Patriots get there. There were weapon systems in Poland that were ready to deliver to Ukraine that were stopped. And that is really unacceptable for this situation.
They were right across the border. And you can imagine, I wonder if some of them might have been flying in the air tonight, right?
Exactly.
Cedric Slayton, Beth Sanner, thanks so much to both of you.
no progress. President Trump just moments ago saying no progress was made to stop the war in Ukraine during a nearly hour-long phone call with Vladimir Putin.
I didn't make any progress with him today at all.
Trump not saying much more about the call, but the Kremlin has shared plenty, including that Putin said he won't stop fighting in Ukraine until the, quote, root causes of the conflict are resolved. This despite Trump telling Putin to end the war, quote, as early as possible. Kristen Holmes is out front at the White House. Kristen, what more are you learning about the substance of what they discussed?
Well, Brianna, I think it's pretty clear that the call did not go as planned for two reasons. One, if you think about the last call that the two leaders had, it was 2.5 hours. This one was nearly an hour, so much shorter. But two, President Trump tends to like to put out some sort of readout of what was talked about in these calls. And we've heard almost nothing from the White House or President Trump. The only reason why he answered it there when he was talking to reporters is because he was directly asked what they talked about on the call. He said they talked about both Ukraine, which he said he was unhappy about, and Iran. And then he was asked specifically, did you make any progress when it comes to the war in Ukraine? And he said, no, I made no progress at all. And that's about it from the United States side. Now, as you said, we've gotten quite a bit of information from the Kremlin side, in particular, that President Trump asked to end military engagement in Ukraine as soon as possible, and that Putin essentially rebuffed him, saying that he wasn't going to be doing that because that doesn't align with their quote-unquote goals, and then the Kremlin clarifying that their goals meant that Russia was not going to back down. This call comes at an interesting time for a number of reasons. One, we heard President Trump, when he was speaking at NATO about the conflict in Ukraine and about Vladimir Putin, really using the most candid terms that we've heard yet. He said that it was possible that Putin was trying to get more territory beyond just Ukraine. That was the first time that President Trump has admitted that, although others in his administration have. He also said that it was proving that the Russian president was incredibly difficult to work with, much harder than he thought it was going to be to end this conflict, that he was surprised at how hard it was to deal with Putin. So that was kind of the most realist version of the relationship and of his view of Putin that we have seen yet. It also comes at a time that the United States and the Pentagon has suspended or paused at least some of the munitions that we were sending to Ukraine. Now, President Trump, we are told by the Kremlin that this didn't come up in the call. President Trump didn't mention it. He also pushed back on the idea that we had paused any kind of support that we were giving Ukraine. To be clear, the Pentagon has confirmed that some shipments have been paused. However, they do push the narrative that not everything that was being sent to Ukraine has stopped going to the country.
Kristen Holmes, thank you so much for that live for us from the North Lawn. Out front now, Seth Jones. He's been talking with senior U.S. officials about the situation in Ukraine, and Andrei Soldatov, a Russian investigative journalist who is currently living in exile. He co-wrote the new book, Our Dear Friends in Moscow, The Inside Story of a Broken Generation. So, Seth, we just heard from the president. He had this call, not as long as other ones he's had with Putin, didn't make any progress. He's not happy. Where does this leave Ukraine?
Well, Brianna, this is not a surprise at all. Putin has been dragging his feet since this war began, and certainly since Trump has been in office, about peace negotiations. In fact, the real irony is we're seeing this week increased strikes by the Russians against civilian sites in Ukraine, which has killed civilians. We've seen a push in areas around Sumy. And then at the same time this week, there's reports out of the Pentagon right now that the U.S. has halted some weapons, including PAC-3 and Hellfire. And of course, the great irony there is that this is more likely to undermine a peace deal rather than to help it. So the administration has been pushing Putin to cut a peace deal, and A, there's been no interest, and B, steps like withholding aid to Ukraine aren't likely to help. They're likely to make the situation worse and reinforce Putin digging in, and that's kind of the situation we're in right now.
Embolden him. And Andre, when you hear that Putin told Trump that Russia won't stop fighting in Ukraine until the, quote, root causes of the conflict are resolved, translate what Putin is saying there, and who is his audience really for this phone call?
Well, it certainly doesn't look like Putin is really interested in peace, especially now when his army is still making some advances on the battlefield. And yet the country, Russia, got really, really tired of the war. And there is a feeling of depression, especially in big cities. And Putin needs to respond to that. And the way he responds is to trying to sell to the domestic audience the idea that Russia is getting back as a superpower, something the country lost back in the Cold War. And the phone call with and conversation with Trump already serves this purpose.